$120 million. That is the amount of new gains that SAG-AFTRA members have in the commercials contract that we voted overwhelmingly to ratify last year. The 2022 SAG-AFTRA commercials contract also has a 10% increase in session fees, flat fee, and per cycle rates across most digital and traditional media. As you might have seen, we've covered other aspects of the new commercials contract in previous programs, and today we are going to look at holding fees and the maximum period of use, commonly referred to as MPU. Hello again, everyone. I'm SAG-AFTRA Executive Vice President Ben Whitehair. Welcome to the third installment of our three-part series on the new commercials contract. Before we dive in today, I do want to introduce you to our American Sign Language interpreters, Joe Rivera and Romina Mena. And as always, this program is recorded, so you can watch it again, share it with your friends. Of course, come back to the SAG-AFTRA YouTube channel to see all of the other amazing content that we have. So, some of the most important changes for performers in the 2022 commercials contract are how the MPU is calculated, the way holding fees are applied, and how non-consecutive use cycles work. That might sound a little confusing, but hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll have a clear understanding of what that means, because with us here today is the SAG-AFTRA National Director of Commercials Contracts, Tracy Hyman. Tracy, thank you so much for being here. For anybody who doesn't know, you've been with SAG-AFTRA for 15 years and a tireless worker on our contracts, enforcing all of these groundbreaking commercial contracts and others that we've done. So thank you for coming to be here with us once again today to talk about MPU and holding fees. Are you ready to kick things off?
I am. Hold on, because this one is thick. We're going to dive right in. Buckle up. So we're going to first share my screen. Here we go. Diving right into MPU. The maximum period of use. What is that? So a commercial has a lifespan of 21 months. And that's the period of time that an advertiser can use the commercial. The end of the 21 months, if they want to continue to use it, they need to come back to you and renegotiate for continued use and a new 21-month period. So when I talk about the maximum period of use, that is the period of time that they're allowed to use the commercial, 21 months. Now, we've changed the way the MPU is calculated. It either begins with the date of first use or 13 weeks after the last production date. It's whichever date is earlier. Let's look at some examples. So we have here our last production date. We have use starting within the first 13 weeks. And that use is going to trigger the 21 months from first use date. We also have, in this example, where use didn't start in the first 13 weeks after the last production date. It's now this date after the 13 weeks that's going to trigger the counting to the 21 months MPU. So it's either going to be the use within the first 13 weeks or the end of the 13 weeks that's going to trigger the MPU. Now, on your paychecks, you should be seeing the last production date so that you can determine what that 13 weeks period is. And remember, the 13-week is a fixed cycle that is not adjusted based on the MPU, but is static based off the last production date. Once the commercial is paid for either the first use or that first holding fee, the payroll company should be stating the maximum period of use date on your check. So when are session and holding fees apply? And better yet, what are session and holding fees? The session fee is what you're paid for actually shooting the commercial. Currently, the on-camera principal rate is $783.10. The holding fee, which equals the same amount as a session, $783.10, is paid every 13 weeks for the most part. We'll get into that. And that is what holds you exclusive or holds your conflict, so you can't do competing commercials, and gives the advertiser the right to continue to use the spot. Let's look at the two different buckets that we have. We have linear, streaming, and traditional digital, or some combination of those, and traditional digital only. We'll start with the first one. So this is when you have linear, which we also know as television, and you can learn more about this in one of our other PTOEs regarding the rates. We have streaming, which includes your streaming channels like Hulu and ABC.com, and also includes social media use, and some form of traditional digital use is being purchased as well. So the session is applying to all the use types, and all use types hold exclusivity automatically, meaning that they do not have to negotiate for the exclusivity. When you see in a breakdown that they're going to be using it on wild spot and cable, should know automatically that they're going to be holding exclusivity. So just like before with the traditional contract, a 4 or 13-week buy of any use type, when it is in this column of the bucket, holding fees are paid and then applied to the use that occurs during that 13 weeks. So the performer is paid a session or a holding fee. That check is applied to the full amount of the use payment that's due, and the performer ends up walking away via the 2 checks with their full payment for the use. Now, if a signatory is purchasing traditional digital and either linear or streaming or both during the MPU, exclusivity and holding fees are also applied for the 4-week and 13-week use cycles. Here's where the big difference comes. It's a 1-year buy. When we created the rates for the 1-year buy, we factored in that exclusivity in the rate, which means that during the 1-year period, there are no holding fees that need to be paid to the performer. They're already absorbed into the use rate that you're being paid. Now, to apply the exclusivity to traditional digital when it's running with linear or streaming, note that it does not have to be running at the same time. It can be consecutive. It just has to be a linear and or streaming use within the MPU along with the purchase of the traditional digital. Look at the second bucket. Session is still applied, but there's no automatic exclusivity, which means you can do competing spots, unless they negotiate for exclusivity and pay no less than a session rate for each 13-week cycle. Now, those holding fees cannot be applied. Those holding fees are paid directly to the performer. A lot of information, but we're going to take some examples and break it down. So let's start with a quick review that if it's a 4-week or 13-week use, holding fees are applied like the old contract, like the traditional contract, versus a 1-year use, which holding fees now are included in the rate. For exclusivity, the 4-week and 13-week holding fees are due and they hold performer exclusive. When you get a 1-year use payment, you'll know automatically that you're being held exclusive for that full year of use, and you will not be getting holding fees during the 1-year use. Let's look at some examples. We'll start with a 13-week use national cable buy. So we know from before that we look at our last production date. We know our 13-week holding fee fixed cycle is going to be 13 weeks from that last production date. Let's say they don't start use yet. They'll have to pay that holding fee, that first holding fee that's due 13 weeks after the last production date. And we know that that's going to trigger the maximum period of use date. Now, during that second 13-week cycle, they're going to start airing it on national cable. What the performer will see is a check for $4,100 minus the $783.10 that they already received at the holding fee. And the performer's actual use payment on that check will be $3316.90. But they'll have already been paid the $783.10. It's sort of like a prepayment to the use that will be coming. And holding fees or use have to continuously being paid during the MPU so that advertiser can continue to use the commercial and hold the performer exclusive. If you are not getting a holding fee or have a use payment for that period of time, the signatory has released you from the commercial. And they have to, as I said, they have to keep paying these holding fees as long as they want the right to use the spot. Let's look at a 1-year buy. So again, we have our last production date. Let's say it's your session. They're starting the 1-year use now within the first 13 weeks. So we know the MPU is going to be based off of that date. The performer is going to have their cable rate check of $13,500. The session fee can be applied, so they'll see that subtraction. And this will be the amount, $12,716.90 will be the amount that the performer's use payment check will reflect. Now, because it's a 1-year use, we have 3 holding fees that occur during that 1-year use. However, as I said, those holding fees do not have to be compensated because the exclusivity has been absorbed into that 1-year cable rate. However, this circled green holding fee does need to be paid, that 4th holding fee, if they want to continue to use the spot. And they have to keep paying every other holding fee moving forward as long as they want to use it. If they pay a use, of course, those holding fees would be applied. Example 3, we're going to have 1 year of cable plus some additional use. Now, I'm sure you can all say it together with me. We have our paid session, use starts, so we know that the MPU is going to be from the first use date that started within the first 13-week cycle. We know that the performer is going to be paid the difference between the session that's applied and the 1-year cable rate. We know that there are 3 holding fees, fixed cycles that appear, but those holding fees do not have to be compensated. And now the company wants to use it on Wild Spot during that 1 year for 13 weeks. The performer will walk away with the full amount of $2,000 because, as you remember, no holding fees need to be compensated, so there is nothing to apply to the $2,000. Again, if the company wants to continue to use it, this 4th holding fee would need to be compensated. Now let's talk about streaming. Streaming includes all traditional digital, which is social media, YouTube, company websites, paid media, gaming, a new category that we've created that addresses emerging platforms, metaverse, augmented reality, and streaming platforms, which are Hulu, Amazon, Peacock, all the things that you're watching your shows on probably at this point. Now, again, this 1-year streaming use that we're going to walk through could apply to any 1-year use type, whether it is cable, Wild Spot, or all other North America. It's all works the same for the 1-year use buy. So we have our session, which is the last production date in this case. It starts streaming within the first 13 weeks, and we know the MPU is triggered. The performer, again, is going to have the session fee applied to use. And we know that these 3 holding fees do not need to be compensated. If they want to continue using it, this holding fee is triggered, and each additional one will be triggered as long as they want to hold exclusive and they're buying 4 or 13-week use cycles. If they were to buy another year of streaming, the same would apply where the 3 holding fees in the middle would not be due. Now we're going to give the example of 1 year of streaming plus 1 year of traditional digital when they are not running at the same time, but they are consecutive. So just like the previous example, we have the 1 year of streaming. The holding fees do not have to be compensated because the exclusivity is tied to the use payment. But now we're going to add in a traditional digital once the 1 year of streaming ends. So we still have to have this holding fee compensated because it's outside of the 1 year. That gives them the right to use it. Now they start the 1-year traditional digital. It gets applied because we know holding fees can be applied. But these 3 holding fees, again, do not need to be compensated because exclusivity is tied to the use payment. And since, even though traditional digital is the only thing running right now, since another type of use was purchased at some point in this MPU, there's automatic exclusivity tied to traditional digital. Now we're going to look at some scenarios with traditional digital only. So this is when there is no other TV or streaming use purchased. So when it's traditional digital only, there is no exclusivity automatic. Traditional digital platforms, like we discussed, are social media, YouTube, company websites. They bought time on, let's say, the New York Times website or on a search engine. So we have the session. The first year of traditional digital only starts. You are still allowed to apply the session to the use. And we know the MPU still is triggered by the 1-year start date. Here, no holding fees are due because they're not holding exclusivity, and they can immediately start a new 1-year traditional digital only as long as there is no break in the use. And remember, again, there is no exclusivity, so this 4th holding fee that was due in the other slides is not due here because it's traditional digital use only. Let's look at another example with the 13-week traditional digital only. But this time, the session is not applied. We have our MPU, we have our use starting. The only time a session may be applied, and this is across the board, is if the use starts within the first 13 weeks. Once they pass that first 13 weeks, session fee can no longer be applied. So here, no holding fees need to be paid because there's no exclusivity. They can just start putting it on traditional digital here in the 3rd holding fee cycle. And the performer will walk away with just a traditional only use payment plus the session fee because it cannot be applied. Now, they bargained for exclusivity with you, which means you're now being held exclusive, but it's still traditional digital only use. They have to pay the session fee, and now they have to pay holding fees. We know that the MPU starts from the holding fee date, and they start the 1-year traditional digital. Now, here's where the difference lies when it's traditional digital only during the MPU. The performer will get their session payment, they'll get their holding fee payment, they'll get the full payment for the traditional digital rate because holding fees cannot be applied in this case. And they would get each holding fee within that year. And those holding fees cannot be applied. So a performer here would walk away with their traditional digital only full payment, their session fee, and each of the 4 holding fee payments on top of that traditional digital only use because it cannot be applied. Now, when we're talking about exclusivity and holding fees and what they're doing, that means that you can't do a competing product. But how does that apply to digital use? Because that's changed. So it's still true that if you're doing social media or YouTube as your only buy, there is no exclusivity. For gaming, there is no exclusivity unless it's bargained for. Traditional digital is only able to have bargained for exclusivity if it's traditional digital only. If it is traditional digital only and they have not bargained for exclusivity, there is no conflict. And finally, with streaming, which includes these other 3, there is automatic exclusivity. So the moment you're paid for streaming, any use on traditional digital during this period and after, because they bought streaming, is going to hold an automatic conflict. That is a lot of information, Ben, I know, and I'm hoping the examples help. And I encourage everyone to go back and watch those examples and really follow the bouncing ball as you go through them.
Yes, it is a lot, but I really appreciate the visual representation. I know, at least for my brain, it's very helpful to see the timeline and get a sense of these different examples and when the MPU applies and payments and all the rest. As a starting point, in addition to obviously this presentation, it sounds like if performers have questions, they've got their check, or they just did a job, they can absolutely reach out to get those questions answered.
100%. Come to us with your check, with all of the dates that are relevant, and we can walk you right through how everything works.
Amazing. Amazing. Okay, couple questions that we have from members. First of which is, how do I know if I'm still being held exclusive during the MPU?
Okay, so on that first bucket, you'll either be getting a holding fee or you will have been paid for use. So let's say you get your holding fee and then you get a check for 1 year use. Normally, and under the old contract, you'd be getting a holding fee every 13 weeks, and that would be the trigger to know that you're being held exclusive. Now, because you've been paid for that 1 year, that's automatic exclusivity. So you know, as long as that year is still happening, you are being held exclusive. When that year ends, that's when you want to look to see if you've gotten another holding fee. But as long as you're being paid a holding fee or a use payment, you are being held exclusive.
Okay, got it. All right, that makes sense. Next question, can a commercial run non-consecutively in traditional digital?
It can, but here's the tweak. If it runs non-consecutive, they have to pay a holding fee in between the uses, and that cannot be applied. But it sort of preserves their right to sort of jump over periods of time. They cannot do that unless they pay that holding fee.
And does that change the MPU?
No, not at all. You're still working off of either the first use date within the 13 weeks or that first holding fee date.
Okay, got it. Okay. All right. Last question that we had on this for now is, does the last production date include when the off-camera performer works?
No, it doesn't. That's a great question. It is only for the on-camera production period. So you could, let's say it's a 3-day production and you work on Monday. The last production date is going to be relying on that third day, the last day that the on-camera production is happening. It may not be the last day you worked, but it's the last day of the on-camera production.
Okay, got it. Fantastic. Well, Tracy, thank you so much for walking us through this. I know that it's if it's at all complicated for us, I know that there's a tremendous amount of work that goes in on your end and your team, staff at the union, to make sure that you all can help walk us through that. So again, to anybody watching, highly recommend you can go take a look at the different chapters of the video that may apply to you. But of course, please feel free to reach out to the union. Staff is happy to answer your questions and walk you through, make sure you understand your checks, what you're being paid, and if, of course, catching any time that there might be an issue. So Tracy, thank you so much again for making the time and for all that you do. For anybody who may have missed the first 2 episodes of our 3-part series on the new commercials payment structure, they are living and breathing, as it were, digitally on the SAG-AFTRA YouTube channel, where you can, of course, find other videos that we've put up. Those videos all for this series covering the payment structure of the new commercials contract. Again, this is a recording, so you can do a replay here on SAG-AFTRA. Take the link, share it with other performers who may have questions, agents, anyone who wants to understand these things. Please send them the link, and you can, of course, replay it here on YouTube, which is alongside an entire library of other programs and important topics that we post here for our PTEOE live streams. On behalf of the entire team here at SAG-AFTRA, thank you so much for watching, with a special shout out to our regular viewers who've been tuning in each week for our educational live streams. And for anyone who has ideas on topics that you may want to see us cover, shoot us an email, pteoe@sagaftra.org. And again, before you go, if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to SAG-AFTRA's YouTube channel so you can get updates on all of the great content that we are publishing. Thank you all.